In a hushed, luxurious restaurant, a young waitress saw more than just a customer. She saw the loneliness in Elara, a blind, elegant woman ignored by the world. But when Elara's ruthless billionaire son arrived, his voice a venomous weapon, he cornered his helpless mother. The waitress had to make a choice: defend the silent woman or keep her job. Her decision to step in would spark a shocking confrontation, expose a vile secret, and unleash a consequence the billionaire never saw coming. Stay with us to see his attempt to fire her backfire instantly. The Aurea restaurant was a cathedral of wealth, all polished marble and golden light on the 52nd floor, overlooking the glittering city. Silence was the most expensive item on the menu. The clinking of heavy silverware was muted by thick carpets, and conversations were hushed negotiations of power, a symphony of quiet, ruthless ambition. For Anna Petrova, this opulent world was a daily, exhausting performance. At 24, she wore her crisp black uniform like armor, a facade hiding the crushing weight of her family's debt. A glance at her cracked phone in the locker room confirmed it, a red, glaring, past-due notice from a collection agency. It was a constant, gnawing fear that made her hands tremble when no one was looking. But on the dining floor, her focus was absolute. Her most important guest, Table 7, had just arrived. Elara Vance. Mrs. Vance was a vision of quiet, old-world elegance, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her tweed suit impeccably tailored. She was also profoundly blind, a fact that made the world terribly uncomfortable. While other staff avoided her table or treated her with loud, insulting pity, Anna had developed a gentle, private language with her. She approached and lightly touched Elara's forearm. A small, warm smile graced Elara's lips. She knew that respectful touch. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance," Anna said softly, her voice a warm counterpoint to the room's chilly grandeur. "The room is beautiful tonight. They have lit the crystal chandelier. It feels like we are dining under stars." Elara's face lit up with a genuine, radiant joy. Anna gently guided Elara's hand. "Your water glass is just here at 1 o'clock, she murmured. "Your linen napkin is to your immediate left." This simple, patient act of dignity transformed Elara from a passive invalid into a respected guest. Elara was Anna's sanctuary, the only part of her day that felt like a real human connection. Anna saw the sharp intelligence behind Elara's sightless eyes. She saw a woman lonely, not because of her blindness, but because the world had stopped trying to see her. This bond, forged in quiet descriptions and mutual respect, was a small, warm fire in a cold room. Anna felt a powerful empathy. She also knew what it was like to be overlooked, defined by a difficult circumstance. Her own inescapable debt was a different, isolating darkness. This shared, unspoken understanding made her service more than a job. It was a private act of defiance. The warm, private moment between Anna and Elara shattered like a dropped champagne flute. The heavy glass doors of the Aurea swung open with a violent thud, striking the marble wall with a crack that made diners wince. A man strode in, not with the easy, inherited confidence of the other patrons, but with a predatory, impatient energy that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the air. This was Marcus Vance. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit that cost more than Anna's yearly salary, but his handsome face which graced the covers of business magazines, was contorted into a mask of cold, dismissive arrogance. He completely ignored the maitre d's flustered greeting, pushing past him as if he were furniture. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the room with a look of profound irritation, finally locking onto table 7. He marched toward his mother, his expensive shoes striking the marble floor in a heavy, angry rhythm that echoed in the cavernous room. Ilara, whose senses were heightened to every subtle shift in the atmosphere, went rigid. She sensed him before she heard him. She felt the sudden, collective intake of breath from nearby tables, the sudden stillness that replaced the gentle hum of conversation. Her hand, which had been resting calmly near her water glass, began to tremble, betraying her sudden terror. Anna, watching from her nearby station, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Marcus reached the table and, without a single word of greeting, yanked back a heavy velvet chair. Its legs scraped with a violent, grating shriek against the pristine marble. He didn't sit. He threw his expensive leather briefcase onto the center of the pristine white tablecloth. The impact was brutally loud, a small explosion in the quiet room. It made the silverware jump and sent a tremor through the table, so jarring that Ilara let out a small, frightened gasp, her hands flying to her chest. Anna flinched, her protective instinct surging so fiercely she had to grip her service tray to keep from stepping forward. The entire restaurant was now engaged in a performance of collective denial. The other diners, masters of feigned indifference, quickly looked down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their food, or signaled frantically for their waiters, desperate for any distraction. They knew this man. They knew his power, his reputation for ruthlessness. They wanted no part of whatever ugly, private drama was about to unfold. The air around table 7, which Anna had so carefully cultivated into a pocket of warmth and dignity, had become a vortex of chilling, palpable fear. Marcus Vance loomed over his mother, a silent, menacing shadow, a predator who had finally, and publicly, cornered his prey. Marcus clicked open the expensive locks on his briefcase, his movements sharp and impatient. He pulled out a thick, imposing stack of documents, at least 50 pages bound in dark blue, and slapped them onto the white tablecloth, directly on top of his mother's bread plate. Ilara flinched at the sound, her body tensing as if bracing for a blow. He then produced a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen, uncapped it with a vicious twist, and grabbed Ilara's frail hand. He tried to force the pen into her grip, his fingers digging into her skin, his knuckles white. "Mother, we are done with this," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper that carried in the tomb-like silence of the dining room. "I do not have time for your senile games tonight. Just sign the papers." He pushed her hand, still holding the pen, down toward the last page, where a small yellow sticker marked a signature line. Ilara made a small, choked sound and tried to pull her hand away, her strength nothing against his. "Stop being a useless burden and sign them," he commanded, his voice louder, colder, laced with a terrifying, raw contempt. Anna watched, frozen behind a service column, her blood running cold. She saw Ilara's face, pale and slick with a terror that was heartbreaking. Ilara was shaking her head in a small, desperate, silent plea, her entire body trembling. The other patrons were now profoundly uncomfortable, statues unified in their cowardly silence, refusing to make eye contact with the ugly scene. Anna understood instantly. He was forcing her. He was using her blindness, her age, her public helplessness as weapons against her. This was not a family disagreement. It was an assault. The revelation was sickening. He was trying to make his blind mother sign documents she could not possibly have read, a stack of papers that clearly represented something immense. Given his aggression, it was something she did not want to give him. His utter lack of morality, his willingness to humiliate his own mother to get what he wanted, was pure, unadulterated evil. Ilara's hand trembled so violently the heavy pen clattered against the table, a tiny, desperate sound in the suffocating, hostile air. Anna stood frozen behind the polished marble service column, her heart hammering a frantic, sick rhythm against her ribs. Her whole world had narrowed to the horrifying tableau at table 7. She saw Marcus's vicious contempt. She saw the thick, legal-looking documents. Most of all, she saw Ilara's pale, terrified face, a mask of silent pleading, her trembling hand trying in vain to resist his brutal, forcing grip. Every instinct screamed at Anna to stay hidden, to protect herself. She thought of the red past due notice on her phone, a glowing red siren of imminent disaster. Losing this job was not an inconvenience. It was a catastrophe. It meant eviction. It meant the collection calls would become legal notices. It meant failing her family, the one thing she had sworn she would never do. Her mind was a battlefield, her suffocating, paralyzing fear warring with a deep, instinctive revulsion at what she was witnessing. She instinctively looked across the opulent dining room for her manager, Mr. Davies. He was the one in charge. He was supposed to handle situations like this, to protect the guests, to maintain order. She saw him. He was standing near the arched entrance to the kitchen, his face as pale and stiff as the starched tablecloths. He saw the entire, ugly confrontation. He saw the aggression. He saw Ilara's terror. And as Anna watched, her last, desperate hope for any managerial intervention died. She saw Mr. Davies deliberately, pointedly, turn his back on the scene. He made a great, cowardly show of inspecting a wine bottle on a nearby service cart, his entire body language screaming a desperate, willful ignorance. He was not going to get involved. He was sacrificing Ilara to protect the restaurant from the wrath of a man like Marcus Vance. That single, cowardly act was like a switch being flipped. The icy fear in Anna's veins was instantly vaporized by a white-hot, uncontrollable surge of pure, righteous anger. It was no longer just anger at Marcus. It was anger at the spineless manager, at the silent, complicit diners, at a whole world that allowed the powerful and the cruel to brutalize the vulnerable, while everyone just looked away. She saw Ilara's face again, and in that moment, she did not just see a wealthy, blind customer. She saw a woman, terrified and alone, being assaulted. The debt, the rent, the fear of financial ruin, it all just evaporated, burned away by a sudden, clarifying moral imperative. She could not be one of the silent ones. She could not be the person who turned her back. Her choice was made, not as a calculation, but as an uncontrollable human reflex. Her jaw tightened. Her hands, which had been trembling with fear, clenched into two tight, steady fists at her sides, wrinkling the fabric of her apron. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but her anger was now a shield, a far greater and more powerful force. It was a reckless, career-ending impulse, but in that second, it felt like the only human thing to do. She took one deep, steadying breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped out from the shadow of the column. The sound of the pen hitting the table was like a starting gun, The tiny, desperate clatter broke Anna's paralysis, shattering her fear with a sudden, white-hot surge of pure, protective rage. It was no longer a choice. Her body moved before her mind could protest, before the thought of her job or her crippling debt could stop her. She dropped the heavy silver tray she was holding onto a nearby service stand. It landed with a dull, heavy thud, and in that moment she had shed her identity as a waitress. She was just a woman who could not, would not, stand by and watch this happen. She stepped out from the protective shadow of the marble column, her head held high. The walk from her station to table 7 felt like it was 100 miles long, a terrifying, brightly lit stage. She could feel the collective, invisible weight of every eye in the room swiveling to follow her, a lowly, uniformed employee daring to break the cardinal rule. She could feel the shocked, horrified stare of her manager, Mr. Davies, from across the room. She ignored it all. Her focus was a laser beam locked on the scene at the table. She did not slow down or hesitate. She walked directly to Marcus Vance, and, in a move of profound, shocking defiance, she physically placed her small body between the towering, enraged billionaire and his terrified, blind mother. It was a human shield. Elara, sensing the new, sudden presence, flinched violently and let out a small, terrified sound. But then, a subtle, familiar scent of lavender and clean linen, Anna's scent, reached her. Her trembling hand, which had been lying defensively on the table, shot out, searching, and her fingers brushed against the sleeve of Anna's uniform. She clung to it, her grip a vice of desperate, disbelieving hope. Marcus Vance, who had been leaning over to retrieve the fallen pen, froze mid-motion. He slowly straightened up, his eyes narrowing, his mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the interruption. His face, inches from Anna's, was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Who was this? This. Nobody. This servant who dared to interfere. The entire restaurant held its breath. The silence was no longer passive or cowardly. It was electric, brittle, waiting to shatter. Anna's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She was terrified, but a strange, cold resolve had settled over her, chilling her fear into steel. She looked directly into the billionaire's stormy, incredulous eyes. Her voice, when it came out, trembled, but it was clear and sharp, cutting through the suffocating tension like a knife. "Sir, that is enough." She said it not as a request, but as a command. A ripple of audible gasps went through the nearby tables. "You will not speak to her that way in this restaurant. You will not touch her. Please, lower your voice." The battle lines were drawn. The lowly waitress had just, in the most public way imaginable, declared war on the most powerful man in the room. Marcus's shock lasted for a single, frozen, incredulous second. It was the pure, unadulterated shock of a king being spat on by a peasant, an emperor being told his robes were non-existent by a mere child. Then the shock evaporated, replaced by a dark, terrifying wave of rage that radiated from him like a physical heat. His face, a mask of cold arrogance just moments before, contorted into a dark, ugly sneer. He let out a short, sharp, brutal laugh, a sound utterly devoid of all humor. It was the sound of pure, unbridled contempt. He leaned in, invading her personal space, bringing his furious face so close to Anna's that she could feel the heat of his breath and smell the expensive, peppery cologne he wore. His voice, when it came, was no longer a hissed whisper. It was a low, guttural snarl, a predator's growl meant to paralyze. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he spat. The words were quiet, yet they vibrated with a dangerous, unrestrained power that seemed to shake the very air around them. He tapped his own chest with a rigid forefinger, a gesture of supreme, untouchable ego. "I am Marcus Vance. I own this city. I could buy this entire building with the loose change in my pocket and not even notice. My name is on buildings, on foundations, on the very checks that probably pay your pathetic little salary. And you—" He looked her up and down, a slow, appraising, utterly dehumanizing gaze. His eyes lingered on her cheap, sensible shoes, the slight fraying on her apron's hem, the simple, unadorned way she wore her hair. It was a physical, slimy assessment, dismissing her entire existence, her uniform, her family, her life. "You are a nobody. You are nothing. A servant, a piece of the furniture that I have simply chosen to notice. And you are—" He paused, savoring the moment, drawing out her execution, his lips twisting into a cruel, satisfied smile. "Fired." He snapped his fingers, a sound as sharp and final as a gunshot in the deathly silent room. "Davies." His voice was a whip-crack, a command that expected instant, groveling obedience. Mr. Davies, the restaurant manager, who had been hovering near the kitchen door, his face a sickly, pale green, practically ran across the floor. He was wringing his hands, his expression one of pure, unadulterated panic, his loyalty not to his staff, but to the billionaire who could ruin him. "Get this trash out of my sight now." Anna's heart plummeted into her stomach, a sickening drop into an icy void. It was done. The single, impulsive act of courage had cost her everything. The job she so desperately needed, the paycheck that kept the wolves of debt from her door, it was all gone. She could feel the blood drain from her face, a cold, dizzying rush of despair. She could feel the manager's trembling hand approaching her arm. She was crushed, utterly ruined, but a deeper, stubborn pride, a force she didn't know she possessed, made her stand her ground. She did not cry, she did not apologize, she simply held her chin high, her gaze unwavering, even as her entire future crumbled around her. Beside her, she felt Elara's hand tighten on her sleeve, a desperate, frantic grip. Elara's face was a mask of pure terror, not for herself this time, but for Anna. This was her fault. Her son's monstrous cruelty was now destroying an innocent, kind young woman. Mr. Davies, the restaurant manager, scrambled across the opulent dining room, his face a sickly, pale green. He was a man defined by his nervous energy and his sycophantic devotion to the restaurant's wealthiest clients, and Marcus Vance was at the very top of that list. Seeing Marcus, enraged, his face a mask of thunderous fury, was Mr. Davies's worst nightmare realized. He arrived at the table, practically skidding on the marble, already wringing his thin, damp hands. He did not even look at Elara. His entire, terrified focus was on pacifying the billionaire who held the restaurant's reputation, and by extension Mr. Davies's career, in the palm of his hand. He immediately turned on Anna, his eyes wide with a mixture of pure panic and visceral betrayal. He could not believe that one of his own staff had caused this catastrophic, expensive disaster. "Anna, what have you done?" he hissed, his voice a strained, panicked whisper. He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed Anna's upper arm, his fingers digging in with surprising, desperate strength, trying to physically drag her away from the table, away from Marcus's line of sight. He was trying to remove the problem, to make her disappear. "Apologize to Mr. Vance. Now," he commanded, practically shaking her. "Tell him you made a mistake. You are finished here. Do you understand me?" Finished. He was already firing her, preemptively, just to show Marcus that he was on his side. His actions were a complete and total abdication of any responsibility he had as a manager, as a human being. He was throwing her to the wolves, sacrificing her in a desperate, cowardly attempt to save himself. For Anna, this was the final, crushing blow. The last, faint hope that someone in authority might step in, that the rules of basic decency might still apply, was extinguished. She was completely, utterly alone. She had stood up to a monster, and in response, her own boss was physically assaulting her, blaming her for the victim's crime. She felt a cold, dizzying wave of despair, the full weight of her catastrophic miscalculation crashing down on her. She had not only lost her job, she had been publicly shamed, branded as trash, and was now being manhandled out of the room like a common criminal. Her heroic, defiant stand, which had felt so right, so necessary just moments before, now felt like a naive, childish, and incredibly stupid mistake. She felt Ilara's hand desperately gripping her sleeve, the older woman's knuckles white, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She had tried to save her, and instead she had only made things infinitely worse. Mr. Davies's fingers were digging painfully into Anna's bicep. He was a man consumed by pure animal panic, and his grip was bruising. He gave a final, desperate yank, a prelude to hauling her physically out of the dining room and throwing her into the service corridor. But just as he pulled, a second hand shot out with the shocking, sudden speed of a striking snake. It was Ilara's. It was the hand of the woman everyone had dismissed, the woman her own son had called a useless burden, the woman who had been trembling in terror just a moment before. But this hand was not trembling. It was purposeful, shockingly fast, and it closed around Anna's other forearm with the unyielding, steely strength of a manacle. The force of the grip was so sudden, so powerful, that it physically stopped Mr. Davies in his tracks, yanking Anna back from his grasp. The manager froze, his mouth half open in a silent O of confusion. He was caught, literally, between the woman he was trying to protect his restaurant from and the woman he was trying to appease. He gave a small, involuntary, confused tug, but Ilara's grip was absolute. She did not let go. Then Ilara's head snapped up. Though blind, her face turned with unerring accuracy toward the sound of her son's voice, toward the epicenter of the conflict. The frail, frightened, and slightly lost demeanor was gone. It had evaporated in an instant, burned away. In its place was a mask of cold, regal, and utterly terrifying authority. When she spoke, her voice was unrecognizable. The soft, gentle, slightly reedy tone that Anna knew so well had vanished. This new voice was a blade. It was deep, clear, resonant, and it sliced through the restaurant's suffocating, stunned silence with absolute, unquestionable power. Stop. The word was not a plea. It was a military command. It was the voice of someone who had built empires, who had commanded boardrooms, who was accustomed to being obeyed, and who had not been. Mr. Davies froze instantly, his hand still clutching Anna's arm, as if he had been turned to stone by the sound. "Let go of her," Elara commanded again. Her voice dropped even lower, gaining a dangerous, icy edge that sent a chill through the room. Marcus, who had been watching the scene with a triumphant, cruel smirk, his arms crossed as he lazily enjoyed the public execution of the little waitress, suddenly stiffened. His smirk didn't just fade, it visibly cracked, faltering on his lips. His eyes narrowed in a flicker of genuine, startled confusion. This was not part of his plan. This was not his weak, senile, easily cowed mother. "She is with me." Those 3 words changed everything. They hung in the electric air, a declaration of alliance that shifted the entire tectonic plate of power in the room. Anna, caught between the 2 grips, was breathless, her heart pounding. She looked at Elara, at this powerful, commanding stranger who had just claimed her. The backfire, the impossible, instant karmic reversal had just begun. The villain's perfect public victory had just hit its first, devastating, and entirely unexpected snag. With Elara's icy, powerful command hanging in the electric air, Mr. Davies's hand spasmed on Anna's arm. He let go, as if her sleeve had suddenly become white-hot, stumbling back a step, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. He looked from Elara to Marcus and back again, his mind utterly broken, unable to process this sudden, violent reversal of the chain of command. He was a man drowning, and the very ground he thought was solid rock had just turned to water. Elara, still holding Anna's forearm in that grip of steel, used her as an anchor. She pulled herself up slowly, deliberately, rising from her chair not as a frail, elderly woman, but as a queen ascending her throne. Her posture, which had been slumped in fear, straightened. Her shoulders went back, her spine aligning into a rod of pure, unbending iron. She lifted her chin, and though her eyes remained sightless, she turned her head with a chilling, unerring precision, aiming her face directly at her son, who stood frozen, his mask of arrogant rage now crumbling into a slack-jawed, ugly confusion. The entire restaurant, a room full of the city's most powerful people, was so quiet it felt like a vacuum. The distant sound of a siren, 52 floors below on the city streets, was suddenly, painfully audible. Anna stood beside Elara, breathless, her arm still held by this woman who had transformed, in the space of 10 seconds, from a victim into a terrifying, unknown force. "Marcus," Elara's voice boomed again, and this time there was no anger in it. There was something far, far colder. A kind of bored, final disappointment. A judge passing a sentence he had long since decided upon. "You seem to forget who you are. You seem to forget who I am." Marcus's mouth opened. A small, stammering sound came out, but no words. He looked, for the first time, like a small, spoiled boy who had just been caught setting a fire. "You walk into this building, my building, and you behave like a common thug. You speak of your power. You speak of your name. You have no power. You have my name." The revelation landed with the force of a physical explosion. Anna felt a jolt go through Elara's hand, a small, final punctuation of her power. "You do not own this hotel, Marcus. I do. You do not run Vance Global. I do. You are an employee. An employee who has, I must say, been grossly overpaid for his incompetence. And she took a single, slow, deliberate breath, letting the weight of her final words gather. I am the founder. I am the CEO. And I am the sole owner. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the dining room. This wasn't just a mother putting her son in his place. This was a boss, the real boss, publicly and systematically dismantling a subordinate. The ruthless billionaire who had terrorized the room was a fraud. He was just a high-level employee, a prince who had forgotten that his mother was, in fact, the reigning, all-powerful queen. Marcus's face had gone from red rage to a sickly, mottled, ashen grey. The power, the arrogance, the very identity he had built had just been stripped from him in front of his peers. The backfire was no longer a possibility. It was a catastrophic, unstoppable reality. Elara's power, having just been declared, now settled over the room like a physical weight, crushing the last remnants of Marcus's authority. She finally let go of Anna's arm. The release was not a dismissal. It was a freeing. Anna no longer needed her protection. Elara now stood alone, a pillar of absolute, terrifying power. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and filled with a chilling theatricality. She reached down to the table, her pale, elegant hands, which her son had so brutally grabbed, now moved with unerring precision. They found the thick stack of blue-bound documents. She did not just pick them up, she lifted them high into the air, holding them up for the entire, silent, and now raptly attentive restaurant to see. It was a gesture of profound, public accusation. And then she spoke to the room, her voice no longer aimed at her son, but at the world, at the dozens of witnesses who had, until now, chosen to see nothing. She was holding court. "Do you know what these are?" she asked, her voice resonating with cold, clear anger. "These papers, which my son was so desperate for me to sign, these papers I cannot even read." She gave a short, bitter, humorless laugh. "They are a legal declaration, a petition to the court filled with lies, stating that I, Elara Vance, am mentally incompetent, senile, a useless burden, I believe he called it." The collective gasp in the room was sharp, a sudden, unified intake of breath. This was no longer a family spat. This was a public, vicious betrayal. "These papers," she continued, holding them even higher, "would give my son total, unchecked power of attorney. They would give him control of my entire fortune, my companies, my homes, my life." She lowered the documents and slammed them back onto the table, the sound a gavel striking in judgment. "He has been trying to do this for 2 years, and tonight he failed. But that," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "is not his only crime. For the past 5 years, my son, this man, has been systematically stealing from me, siphoning millions from the foundation I built, from the company I gave him, routing it into his own secret accounts. This," she tapped the papers, "this was just his final, desperate act to cover his tracks, to silence me before I found him out. The revelation was complete. The vile secret from the hook was now bare for all to see. It was a plot of staggering Shakespearean greed and cruelty." Anna stared, her heart pounding, finally understanding. She hadn't just saved Elara from an insult. She had saved her from total, utter ruin. She had, in one single, impulsive act, derailed a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. The room was no longer just silent. It was frozen. The diners, the staff, they were all processing the sheer, monstrous scale of the villainy they had just seen. And at the center of it all stood Marcus, his face no longer ashen. It was a waxy, sickly white, slick, with a sudden, cold sweat. He had been exposed, completely, utterly, and irrevocably. Marcus's face, that mask of granite and arrogant rage, completely and utterly shattered. The ashen, waxy white of his shock was replaced by a sudden, ugly, blotchy red that crawled up his neck. His entire body began to tremble, not with power, but with the raw, primal, cornered animal terror of a man whose entire world had just been demolished. His crimes, his lies, his carefully constructed persona of power, all of it had been laid bare in front of the very people he had spent his life trying to dominate. He had been fatally underestimated by the one person he believed he had neutralized. He made a sound, a high-pitched, strangled, guttural noise that was half gasp, half sob. His eyes, wide and suddenly manic, darted around the silent watching room. He was searching for an exit, an escape, an ally. But he found only a sea of cold, staring, judgmental faces. The power he had wielded just minutes ago, the power to fire, to humiliate, to terrify, was gone. It had evaporated in an instant. He was no longer a predator. He was pathetic, exposed prey. He lunged. It was not a move of cold calculation, but of pure, unadulterated, childish panic. He lunged across the table, his arms flailing, his meticulously tailored suit bunching at his shoulders. He was trying to snatch the stack of incriminating documents from his mother's grasp. He had to destroy the evidence. He had to silence her. "She's lying," he shrieked. His voice, once a commanding baritone, cracked and pitched upward into an ugly, desperate, whining register that was horrifyingly juvenile. "She's confused. She's old. She doesn't know what she's saying." He was sputtering, flecks of spittle flying from his lips as he frantically tried to spin a new narrative. "She's senile. Look at her. I've been trying to protect her. I've been trying to protect the company from her." It was a pathetic, frantic volley of transparent lies, each one weaker and more transparent than the last. But Ilara was faster. She was a woman made of iron and ice. With a move of chilling, practiced calm, she simply pulled the documents off the table and held them against her chest, completely out of his reach. Marcus's desperate, clumsy lunge met only empty air. He stumbled, his balance lost, and had to catch himself on the edge of the table to keep from falling. His fist, his manicured, powerful hand, landed with a wet, sickening crunch in a plate of untouched, expensive appetizers. He was no longer the ruthless billionaire. He was a sputtering, desperate child, his face slick with a sudden, cold sweat, his $1,000 suit now stained with olive oil and balsamic glaze, his dignity utterly, irrevocably, and publicly gone. Anna watched, her fear having completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear, stunned awe. This was the man who had terrified her. This was the man who had tried to ruin her. He was nothing. He was a hollow, terrified shell, and the sight of his complete and total disintegration was the most deeply satisfying, karmic justice she had ever witnessed. The arrogant giant had been reduced to a trembling, frantic mess by the very woman he had called a useless burden. Ilara Vance stood in perfect, regal stillness. She did not flinch or react to her son's pathetic, stained, and sputtering display. She simply waited, a statue of righteous judgment, as he frantically tried to wipe the olive oil from his suit onto the pristine tablecloth. The entire aurea was frozen, a tableau of silent shock. Anna, her heart pounding, could not look away. This was a complete societal execution. Elara then, with a movement so subtle that almost no one perceived it, moved her free hand. The hand, not clutching the incriminating documents to her chest, drifted to her side. It brushed against the fine tweed of her skirt, her fingers finding a small, discreet object seamlessly sewn into the side pocket. It was a small, pearl-like button, a silent alarm. She pressed it once. It was a quiet, simple, and utterly final gesture. For one agonizing second, nothing happened. The tension stretched. Marcus, seeing his pathetic lies were failing, seemed to gather his ruined dignity for one last, desperate lunge. He took a single, menacing step toward his mother. And then the grand glass doors of the restaurant burst open. This time, it was not one arrogant man. It was two. Two men, massive in stature, built like granite walls, and dressed in severe, dark, perfectly tailored suits. They wore discreet earpieces, and their cold, assessing eyes were not taking in the room. They were locked, with terrifying, singular focus, on Marcus. They were Elara's personal security team, and they moved with a silent, fluid, lethal efficiency. Mr. Davies, who had been trying to melt into the wallpaper, let out a small, choked sound. The air, which had been silent, was now thick with a new, dangerous energy. Elara finally spoke again, her voice never wavering, still cold, still powerful, cutting through the tension like a diamond. "Marcus, you are fired." The 4 words were simple, blunt, and utterly devastating. She was not just firing him from the restaurant. She was firing him from his job, his title, his power, his entire life. She then nodded, a short, sharp gesture, toward the 2 large men who had now seamlessly and silently flanked Marcus, one on each side, cutting off all escape. "Gentlemen, please escort my son out of my building. He is to be denied all access to all Vance Global properties, effective immediately. His company accounts will be frozen by the time you reach the lobby. He will be hearing from my lawyers by the end of the hour." The backfire was now complete. The promise of the title was fulfilled. His attempt to fire the lowly waitress had resulted in his own spectacular, public, and humiliating firing. Marcus's face, which had been a mask of sputtering panic, was now a portrait of pure, unadulterated, slack-jawed disbelief. This could not be happening. This was impossible. He tried to puff himself up, to regain one last shred of his old authority. You can't do this to me," he snarled, a pathetic attempt at his former menace. One of the security men did not even speak. He simply took Marcus's upper arm in a grip so powerful it made the billionaire's knees buckle with a pained wince. The man was a toy in their grasp. Karmic justice was swift, it was total, and it was delicious. Anna watched, her hand over her mouth, as the titan who had tried to ruin her was unceremoniously and physically dragged away. The 2 massive security men dragged Marcus Vance out of the aurea. His exit was as undignified as his entrance had been arrogant. He was screaming, a stream of vulgar, incoherent threats of lawsuits and revenge that echoed off the marble walls, growing fainter as they hauled him toward the elevators. Then the heavy glass doors swung shut, and the silence that descended was absolute. It was a thick, heavy, post-explosion quiet, a vacuum in which everyone, the wealthy diners, the frozen staff, seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. No one moved, no one spoke. Forks were suspended mid-air. The city's elite had just witnessed a public, brutal corporate assassination, a family drama of almost Shakespearean proportions, and they were all processing the sheer, raw, utterly unbelievable spectacle. Anna stood by the table, her entire body vibrating with a high-frequency hum of pure, unprocessed adrenaline. Her legs felt weak, as if they might buckle. She was shaking, a fine, uncontrollable tremor in her hands. She stared at the empty space where Marcus had been, her mind replaying the last 10 minutes in a dizzying, chaotic loop. The threats, her firing, Elara's transformation, the security guards. It was too much, a terrifying fever dream. Beside her, Elara let out a breath. It was not a sigh. It was a profound, shuddering exhalation of air she seemed to have been holding for years. The iron rod posture, the terrifying mask of command, suddenly dissolved. Her shoulders slumped. The formidable CEO vanished, and in her place was the elderly, tired, blind woman. She seemed to age a decade, the immense effort of the confrontation having drained her. She groped for the chair, her hand trembling, and she didn't just sit. She collapsed into the velvet seat, her body heavy with exhaustion, her face pale and frail. She had won, she had saved her empire, but the victory had cost her dearly, forcing her to publicly destroy her own son. Anna saw this. She saw the shift, the sudden, overwhelming vulnerability, the profound, unstated pain. In that moment, her adrenaline, her shock, her own terror, all of it snapped into a new, familiar focus. Her training, her deep, instinctive, empathetic nature, her core virtue took over. She was no longer a spectator. She was a caregiver. She didn't think. She acted. She reached for the heavy, crystal water bottle on the table. Her hands were still shaking, but her movements were sure. She picked it up, along with a clean glass. She poured the water, the sound of it, a clear, gentle stream, the only noise in the dead, silent room. She placed the glass, gently, carefully, into Elara's trembling, searching hand, just as she had done before. "Your water, Mrs. Vance," she murmured, her voice soft, the first human sound to break the spell. It was an act of profound, simple kindness, a return to normalcy. She had been fired and humiliated, yet her first, unthinking instinct was not to save herself, but to care for the person who needed her. Elara's trembling hand, the one Anna had just placed the water glass into, did not let go. After taking a small, grateful sip, Elara set the glass down on the table with a soft click, but her hand, her frail, paper-thin skin surprisingly strong, immediately shot back out, searching. It found Anna's, which was still resting on the table from the gesture. Elara's fingers, cold and trembling, wrapped around Anna's. She held on, not with the frantic, desperate grip of the victim she had been, but with a new, profound, and deeply human intensity. She was holding on as if Anna were an anchor, the only real thing in a world that had become a waking nightmare. Anna, her own body still vibrating with the aftershocks of adrenaline, froze. She let her hand be held. She looked down at their joined hands, the old, elegant hand of the secret billionaire, and her own, the calloused, chapped hand of a waitress. It was an impossible, surreal image. The rest of the restaurant, The wealthy diners, the terrified, frozen staff, they were all still there. They were all still watching. The show was not over. It had simply entered this new, quiet, intensely personal phase. Elara took another deep, shuddering breath and turned her sightless eyes toward Anna. The cold, commanding mask of the CEO was gone, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that was almost more shocking. Tears began to well, glistening in her eyes before, finally, slowly, tracing 2 paths down her wrinkled cheeks. For 2 years, Elara's voice was barely a whisper, a ragged, broken sound that was meant only for Anna. For 2 long years, since my son realized I would not just hand him my life's work, I have been a prisoner in my own home. A prisoner. He surrounded me with his own people, doctors who would declare me confused, staff who reported my every word. He isolated me, took away my phone, my contacts. He told the world I was becoming senile, and the world, it believed him. She squeezed Anna's hand, her grip tightening with the pain of the memory. He brought me here tonight. He said it was a final courtesy, a final chance to sign away my life before he had me committed. He knew I was alone. He knew no one would dare to help me. Anna could only stare, her heart breaking, the sheer, calculated, diabolical cruelty of it stealing her breath. "And then you," Elara whispered, a note of pure, unadulterated awe entering her voice. "You, a stranger, a young woman with her own life, her own problems. You were the only one. The only one who ever treated me like a person, not an invalid. The only one who saw me. And you were the only one brave enough to speak up when he... She choked on a sob, unable to finish the sentence. She lifted Anna's hand, pressing the back of it to her tear-streaked cheek. "You did not just save me from humiliation, child. You saved my life. You saved my company. You saved me." Elara's heartfelt, whispered words, her tears, her gratitude, they all wrapped around Anna in a warm, disbelieving embrace. For a single, fleeting moment, Anna felt a dizzying, profound sense of purpose. She had done something that mattered. She had saved this good, kind woman. The adrenaline, the terror, it all receded, leaving behind this one pure, beautiful feeling of connection. But then, as the last echoes of Marcus's screams faded and the oppressive silence of the restaurant reasserted itself, Anna's own reality came crashing back in. It was a brutal, cold, physical shock, like being doused with a bucket of ice water. The warmth vanished, replaced by a familiar, sickening, hollow dread. Her hand, the one Elara was clutching, was the hand of an unemployed person. Her uniform was the uniform of a woman who had just been publicly fired. Her heroism had been a catastrophic, life-altering financial mistake. She looked up from Elara's tear-streaked face. Her gaze, desperate and dazed, scanned the room. The diners were still there, all of them, silent, staring, their expensive meals forgotten, and then her eyes landed on him, Mr. Davies, the manager, who had grabbed her arm, who had called her trash, who had been so desperate to throw her to the wolves, was standing about 10 feet away. He was a pathetic, wilted statue of a man. His face was a sickly, pale, greenish-white, slick with a film of cold sweat. He was staring at Anna, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a new, profound, and utterly groveling terror. It was not the panic he had shown before. This was a deeper, more existential fear. He was looking at Anna not as his subordinate, but as the chosen confidant of the true, all-powerful owner. He looked at her as if she were a new, unknown, and terrifying form of royalty. The sight of him, his pathetic, awestruck fear, was the final, devastating reminder. He was her boss. He had let her be fired. The words, Marcus's words, "You are fired," echoed in her head, final and absolute. Elara might be the owner, but she was in the middle of a crisis. She had a corporate empire to save, a criminal son to deal with. She wouldn't be thinking about a waitress. Anna's stomach clenched. The red past due notice flashed behind her eyes. Her rent, her family. She had to leave. She couldn't just sit here, holding this billionaire's hand as if she belonged. She gently, respectfully, tried to slide her hand out of Elara's. Elara's grip tightened, a reflexive, questioning panic. Anna's throat felt thick. Her voice, when it came out, was a raw, trembling whisper, thick with a new, heartbreaking wave of despair. "Mrs. Vance, I am so glad you are safe. You are so brave." Her words were genuine, but they were the words of a goodbye. "But I have to go. Mr. Vance, your son, he fired me. I've lost my job. I need to go." She was reminding the audience, and herself, of her dire stakes one last time. Elara's grip on Anna's hand, which had been questioning and fearful, did not loosen for a second. Instead, it became firm again, a warm, strong, possessive anchor, physically refusing to let Anna pull away. The heartbroken, exhausted, and vulnerable old woman vanished in a blink, and in her place, the powerful, all-seeing CEO returned. The tears on her cheeks were still wet, but her face was transforming. A smile, slow and deliberate, began to spread across her lips. It was not the gentle, polite smile Anna was used to seeing. This was a real, powerful, and deeply intelligent smile. It was the smile of a grandmaster in chess who had just seen the entire, chaotic board and was now, finally, ready to move her most important piece. Elara shook her head, a short, sharp, definitive gesture. It was a silent, powerful no that echoed in the vast watching room. Anna's words, her fears, her desperate resignation, Elara was dismissing them all as utterly irrelevant. "My dear," she said, her voice now completely restored, the warm, resonant, blade-like instrument of command she had used to destroy her son. She was no longer whispering. She was speaking for the whole room to hear, especially the terrified, waxen-faced Mr. Davies, who looked as though he might physically faint. "You have not lost a job." Anna blinked, her mind slow to catch up, her heart still pounding with the frantic, sick rhythm of her own despair. What do you mean?" "I am offering you a career," Elara stated, her voice clear, crisp, and final. It was not a request, it was a declaration. The entire, silent audience of diners leaned in, their collective breath held. This was the true climax of the show. Mr. Davies's eyes were so wide they looked as if they might fall from his head. He was witnessing his own instant, humiliating replacement. Elara turned her head slightly, as if to address the manager, the staff, and the entire world that had so profoundly failed her. "I find myself in sudden, urgent need of a new executive assistant. My last one, it seems, was on my son's payroll, busy helping him declare me senile. I need someone to help me clean house at Vance Global. I need someone to be my eyes, my voice, and my right hand." and most importantly, she turned her face back to Anna, her smile softening with genuine, profound warmth. I need someone with integrity. I need someone who is brave. I need someone I can trust. She paused, letting the weight of the offer, the sheer, staggering, life-altering magnitude of it, settle onto Anna's shoulders. She was offering her the keys to the kingdom. How would you like the job, Anna Petrova? It was the ultimate Cinderella payoff. It was the extravagant, karmic reward for virtue, delivered not in a quiet, private office, but publicly, in front of the very people who had witnessed her humiliation. She had been called trash by the false king, and she was now being crowned as the right hand of the true queen. The world had turned upside down. Anna's poverty, her debt, her fear, it was all about to be erased, not by magic, but by one single, defining act of courage. Anna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Anna just stared. Her mouth was open, a small, silent O of disbelief. The words Ilara had just spoken. Executive assistant. Integrity. Trust. Career. They were just sounds, echoing in the vast, stunned cavern of her mind. They didn't make sense. They were words for other people, for college graduates, for people who weren't drowning. She was Anna Petrova. She was a waitress. She was the girl with the past due notices, the girl who had just been publicly fired and called trash. Her brain simply could not compute the new reality. She was still trapped in the old one, the one where she was ruined. She must have looked as lost and terrified as she felt, because Ilara's powerful, knowing smile softened into one of profound, almost maternal tenderness. She saw the raw, lingering shock on Anna's face, the uncomprehending fear, and she understood. She was offering her a title, but Anna needed a lifeline. Ilara had not forgotten the look on Anna's face when Marcus had threatened her job. She had not forgotten her own words from moments before, that Anna was a young woman with her own life, her own problems. She had to make the abstract real. I see you are hesitating, Anna, Ilara said, her voice still loud enough for the entire room to hear, a calculated, public performance of generosity. Perhaps I have not been clear about the compensation. The position of my executive assistant, my personal right hand, comes with a starting salary of $300,000 a year. The number landed in the room with the force of a physical detonation. $300,000. Anna's knees, which had been trembling, finally buckled. She swayed, her hand flying to her mouth as a strangled, tiny sound escaped her, the sound of her entire life breaking in two. Ilara wasn't finished. She gave Anna's hand a small, firm, grounding squeeze. I know about your family's debts, my dear. I know what you have been struggling against. This salary, this new life, it means that the debts you are carrying, the ones that keep you awake at night, they will be cleared. Not in a year, not in a month. They will be gone in one single day. Those words, one day, that was what did it. That was the key that finally unlocked Anna's frozen, terrified heart. The red, glaring past due notice that had haunted her for months, the specter of her father's failures, the crushing, relentless, grinding weight of poverty, it all just dissolved. It evaporated. A wave of lightness, so profound and so sudden it was almost painful, washed over her. The tears that had been stinging her eyes tears of fear and humiliation, finally broke free. But they were not tears of sadness. They were a violent, cleansing, unstoppable flood of pure, unadulterated relief. She choked on a sob, her whole body shaking as the tension of years, of her entire adult life, just poured out of her. At the edge of her vision, she saw Mr. Davies, his eyes rolling back in his head, his body folding like a cheap suit, as he finally, mercifully, fainted, slumping to the marble floor with a soft, pathetic thud. Elara's smile was radiant. "You will never have to be afraid again, Anna." Anna, weeping, could only nod. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, over and over. Yes, yes, yes. 3 days later, Anna was not in her stiff, black polyester uniform. She was wearing a simple, elegant, cream-colored silk blouse and dark, perfectly tailored trousers, clothes that had been delivered in a large, anonymous box to her small Queen's apartment just that morning, with a simple, typed note that read, "Welcome to your new life." She was not in the cold, opulent, and judgmental dining room of the Aurea. She was sitting in Elara Vance's sun-drenched penthouse solarium, a vast, glass-walled room filled with so much light it felt like sitting inside a cloud. The air smelled of jasmine and orchids, and the city skyline, which had once looked like an impenetrable fortress of unattainable wealth from the restaurant's window, now just looked like a beautiful, abstract painting. Elara was sitting beside her on a plush sofa, a thick stack of corporate binders on the polished table before them. But the atmosphere was not one of stress or work. It was one of learning, of partnership. Elara was describing the personalities, the voices, and political tells of her board members, her face animated with a strategist's glee. Anna was listening, a brand-new, sleek laptop on her knees, her own face a picture of calm, focused engagement. The terrified, haunted, exhausted look that had lived in her eyes for years was, quite simply, gone. Anna looked down at her own hands, resting on the warm keyboard. They were not shaking. For the first time in her adult life, the constant, low-grade, gnawing thrum of financial dread was silent. It was so profound, this absence of terror, that it felt like a new, unfamiliar, and exquisitely beautiful sensation. She could breathe. She could actually, truly breathe. Her shoulders relaxed, no longer tensed for the next inevitable financial blow. Her father's debts, a legacy of shame and fear that had dictated her every choice, had been wiped away in a single, silent, electronic transfer. She thought back to that night in the restaurant, the moment she had stepped out from behind the marble column, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs. It had been a single, reckless, terrifying impulse, an act of simple human decency that she had been absolutely, paralyzingly certain had ruined her. But it had not. It had saved her. It had redefined her. She had spent her entire life believing that the world was run by men like Marcus, all cold, ruthless, hollow power. She had been wrong. She saw now that the world was truly run, truly built, by women like Elara, women whose power was not a weapon of cruelty, but a tool of integrity, a shield of character. And now, Anna was one of them. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a woman who had been tested, who had been weighed, and who had not been found wanting. Elara paused in her story, as if sensing Anna's profound, quiet reflection. She reached out her hand, not in fear, not in desperation, but in calm, quiet partnership. Anna met it, lacing her fingers through the older woman's. The grip was warm, strong, and real. It was no longer the hand of a billionaire owner clinging to a terrified waitress. It was the hand of a mentor holding her protégé, a partner holding a partner, a friend holding a friend. Anna smiled, a real, genuine, radiant smile that came from deep within, looking out at the endless city that had once terrified her but now seemed full of nothing but promise. She had stepped into the fire for a stranger, and in doing so, had forged an entirely new life for herself, proving that the most powerful currency in the world was not, and never would be, money. It was courage. If this story about Anna's courage reminded you that one voice can be louder than an entire room of silence, please show your support with a thumbs up. We'd love to read your thoughts, so comment below with the one moment that truly shocked you. Your engagement is what fuels this channel and helps us bring more stories of integrity and justice to light. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of good triumphing over greed. Finally, share this video with someone in your life who needs a reminder that you don't need a billionaire's power to change the world. You just need the courage to speak up, even when your voice is shaking. Thank you for watching.